Let's take a look at my tropical garden just outside Seattle, Washington, Zone 8A. Some of these plants are tropical, others are subtropical, others are cold hardy, but they all do well here if treated properly. Let's see how they grew over this last summer. We're going to take a look at what these plants look like in May, and then what they look like now in the middle of October, and how they grew over the last few months. We're going to start with a bird of paradise. This is one of two that I have. This first one is the bigger of the two. It was a little bit leaning last year. At the end of the summer last year, I divided this plant. When I originally bought them, there were two in one pot that I found at Home Depot. And the end of last year, I separated the two before I brought them in for the winter. This is the bigger one here. Let's take a look at it now. I had to move it indoors as it's started to get cold already, but as you can see, it's doing well. It pushed out a few new leaves and continues to grow really well for me. Nice big leaves, all green, no issues at all. Really happy with this plant. Then if we look at the second one, you can see this one was in much worse shape initially, but I did divide it, and you can see it was pushing out new growth, so it was still okay. And let's take a look at it now. It's pushed out a couple of new leaves and is looking really healthy. Down below, this thing is going nuts. It's shot out a bunch of new offshoots, and it'll be interesting to follow these as they continue to grow and see how this thing develops. You can see 4 or 5 different new offshoots that this thing has, that it's going to be funky when it gets done. So excited to see how that goes. Next, let's take a look at the blue Java bananas. I put these in the ground, or some of them, not all of them, in the ground this year in the front. You can see this, again, this is in May. There was some damage on the leaves because I got really lazy in watering towards the end of winter. Just busy doing other stuff and didn't always have time to give it the right water that it needed. And that's the brown that you see around the edges of the leaves. That's from not getting enough water, but they were still pretty healthy plants and got them in the ground. Taking a look at them now, these things did really well. You can see we've got pups on the 2 main plants, one on either side there, and then on the other one in the front, one in the back. You can see the stems themselves, these main stems, they grew a few feet in additional height and about doubled in width. So these things did really well. I will dig these out for the winter, and they'll get planted back in the ground come next spring. Next, we've got a cabbage palm. This was new for me last year and did okay in the winter, being inside most of the winter, and was ready to put on some growth. I was hoping to get a nice big palm started, and it's grown a few extra fronds, but not really quite what I was hoping for. It looks okay, but it's cool to have, and it does actually stay outside a lot of the winter, so, and it seems to do okay. We'll leave it out again, expose it to some cold, and bring it in for just the coldest nights. Next, we're looking at a Chamerops. This is a Mediterranean fan or European fan palm, and it has done well for me. I've had it for 4 years. It stays in the pot and stays outside most of the year. It gets most of the rain in the winter. I only bring it in when it's well below freezing. If it's low 20s Fahrenheit or negative 10 C or so, I'll start to bring it inside once it gets that cold. But other than that, this thing sits outside. If we take a look at it now at the end of summer, it doesn't actually look all that different. It did push out a few fronds, didn't really get much taller, It's got some different weeds in it than it had at the start of the year. And overall, it's really healthy. It's got a couple of little baby shoots that have been around for a little bit now, but overall, it looks good. It's healthy, and looking forward to more years of this. Next, we'll take a look at the Chamerops in the front yard. This is what it looked like in May. It took some significant damage over the winter being outside. It's got 5 or 6 trunks. Every one of them lost its spear over the winter. And so at the start of the spring here, I had no hope for this plant. I didn't think it was going to survive, having lost all of the spears. It was kind of like, well, we'll just leave it and see what happens. I did not treat it at all. No hydrogen peroxide, no copper fungicide, nothing. I just decided either it's going to live or it's going to die, and it will decide what it wants to do. So let's take a look at it now at the end of summer. It actually looks really good. Surprisingly for me, I mean, if you grow these a lot, you might not be surprised, but I was surprised to find every one of the spears grew back except for one. There was only one trunk that didn't get its spear back in the center. But all the ones on the outside, they all grew back and looks healthy, doing really well, and hopefully it doesn't get as cold this winter and it can keep its spears for next year and get even bigger by the end of next year. Next, we're looking at a Musa double Mahoi. This is what it looked like in May. There were 2 main trunks. The bigger one was the original plant that I bought. The pup was pushed out, I think, 2 years ago. And started to develop. We had a new baby little pup that started sometime last year that was kicking up and getting ready to grow. And if we look at him now, the pup has gotten a little bit bigger, but the other 2, they pushed out new leaves, these stems, but didn't really get much taller. So they're about the same size as they were. They're a little bit yellow, I think because I left them out too long and they saw colder than desirable temperatures. So some of the older leaves started to yellow, but overall they're doing okay and indoors now for the winter. Next to it is a dwarf Cavendish, and this plant, it's been around for a long time. I've had this for, I think, 6 years, 5 or 6 years. At the beginning of the spring, it had just pushed out a new pup, and that was pretty exciting that I finally got another one. Let's take a look at it now at the end of summer. Hardly looks any different. It did push out new leaves throughout the summer. I got 4 or so new leaves. I did not put it outside. It sat right here in front of the window, so it did get a lot of indirect and direct sunlight filtered through the window. But didn't really get much bigger, and the pup didn't grow at all. Same size as it was at the start of the year. Next, let's look at the elephant ears. Here they are, just popping out of the ground in May. Now these I leave in the ground. I do not dig them up. This area is well protected from rain as it sits underneath my neighbor's cedar tree. So they don't get very wet at all, but I'm too lazy to dig them up. And I don't dig up anything out of the yard bulb-wise. I leave them, and if they come back, great. If they don't, wasn't meant to be. So these are meant to be. They came back, and let's take a look at them now. You'll see they're not as big as they normally are, or as filled in as they normally are. 2 reasons for that. One, our summer was pretty mild and shorter than it normally is. We got a late start to warm temperatures, and we had very few days that were actually really hot here this year. The leaves are smaller, and there just aren't as many. The other reason is I dug some of them out at the start of the year, wanted to move them to my other house in Grayland, and so I dug a few of these out and planted those over at the other place. Next, we will look at the red Abyssinian. First, I have 2 of these, one in the front and one in the back. The one in the front yard, first year in the ground. It's been in a pot as long as I've had it. and put this in, got the drip line to it, and looking at it now in October, needs some Ozempic or something, needs to go on a diet. It got really fat, did not get any taller, which it's fine. It still looks really cool. I love the colors on it. I mean, they almost look fake. The dark red and the bright green looks like I photoshopped it, but it just got fatter, didn't really get any taller, and pushed out a few new leaves there. I will dig this out and put it inside for the winter and hope that next year it will get at least a little bit taller than what it is today. And if we look at the one in the back, this thing had a rough go over winter. It was fine. It wasn't in any real danger, but just some of the leaves got broken, having it in the house, either people walking into them or the dog doing stuff. So it was a little bit sad looking. It was kind of tilted too in the pot that it was in. So trying to straighten this thing out here and get it looking a little better. Let's take a look at how it looks today. Slightly buried in the bamboo and the Musa Basjoos that live around it, but doing okay. It didn't get a lot taller either. It needs to be trimmed up here. Some of the older leaves are still on it that should be cut off, but straightened out, which is good. Didn't really get a lot wider either. The new leaves did have a little bit of height on them, but not a lot more than what was there at the start of the year. So this one will also get dug out and we will give it a go in the ground again next year. Next, we're looking at a Royal Poinciana, also referred to as a Flamboyan. Shouldn't be here at all. I left it inside. It's survived 2 winters now, indoors, and has done really well. It grows in the winter, or at least it has the first 2 winters. And taking a look at it at the end of summer, still doing really well. You'll see a little bit of yellow leaves. That is from me being lazy with the watering. This stayed indoors all year, and I don't have a drip line inside my house. So sometimes I just didn't water it enough. This is a really thirsty plant and needs to be watered quite frequently. Otherwise the leaves start to turn yellow. But it's doing really well, and I'm going to have to figure out soon what to do with this thing. I'll probably try and just keep trimming it, do some kind of bonsai on it to keep it small as long as I can. Next, we're looking at the orange hot lava. This one was looking a little bit rough at the start of the spring. It looked even worse than this at the end of last year. I transplanted this from a pot into the ground and it didn't like it at all last summer. It came through the winter. It was all sticks. Early spring pushed out a few leaves, and here's what it looked like in May. We take a look at it now. You will see it filled out quite a bit more and actually had a few flowers there, which are great. One of my favorite flowers of all the plants in my yard, and hoping that next year it'll be even more full. Next, we have the sad Heliconia. So at the start of spring, this was looking really rough. There were a couple of reasons. One is that laziness in watering. This is another really thirsty plant, and being lazy in watering at the end of spring there before I put them outside did not help. The other thing that was bad that I did to this plant is when I brought it in last winter, I put it a little bit too close to the fireplace, which I think dried it out quite a bit. So this is what it looked like at the start of the season, and now still looks pretty sad. Something outside loves chomping on the new leaves. I don't know what it is, but all the new leaves get bites taken out of them when this plant is outdoors, and so you see that on all the new growth. I mean, the good news is it is still growing and still pushing out new leaves, so there's hope for it yet. I'm going to try and do a better job watering it and not give up on the watering like I did towards the end of the cold season, and hope this does better next year. Next, we're taking a look at the Loquat. This was new last summer. It did spend the winter outside. and it survived the winter, no issues, no real issues. It lost a couple of leaves, but you can see early in the spring, it already had started putting on new growth and was looking pretty good. So if we look at this now, you will see this thing is almost doubled in size. It looks really good, really healthy. I'm excited to have a tree with leaves on it all year. This will not lose its leaves. So real excited about this one, and looking forward to getting it through another winter, and hopefully it'll double again next year and start to get real big. Now this plant stays outside in the ground, so it's not going anywhere, and I'll put Christmas lights on it if it gets real cold. Next on the list, we have Manzano Bananas. I've got two of these. They're pretty small, pretty averagey to not okay looking at the beginning of the year. I mean, they did come out of winter okay. They were in the house, came out alive still, which is positive, with a couple of little pups. If we look at them now, they didn't do all that much this summer. You can see the pups got bigger, and they look okay. The main plants didn't really get any taller. They're about the same size as they were. I got new leaves out of them, but just did not put on any real height. So we'll see if they can make it another winter indoors, and we will get them back outside next year and try again. Next, we'll take a look at the Musa Basjoos. Now, a couple of things to note with these. One, at the end of last year, I cut these all out early because they had some sort of fungus that was starting to kill them all, and I wasn't sure if they were going to come back at all. You can see here, again, this is middle of May, they had started to push out new growth. None of the old, larger trunks came back at all. Now, a few of these fruited last year, and so you wouldn't expect those to come back, but a number of these did not fruit last year, and none of the larger ones came back at all. But a lot of new growth was pushed out, and we had lots of plants. Taking a look at how they ended up, not nearly as tall as they normally are. I think a few things contributed to that. One, the bamboo actually really grew in thick this year, and that took out some of the sunlight. If you look at my neighbor Tim's plants, his are actually a little bit taller than mine. His don't get the impact from the bamboo, so they get more sunlight than mine did this year. Another thing is me being lazy again. I did not. I was less diligent with my fertilizing than I normally am, so they didn't get quite the same amount of fertilizer as they normally would have. I'm sure that contributed. So a combination of those things: disease from last year, no large established stems returning, the thickness of the bamboo and blocking some of the sunlight, and add to it too, just as I mentioned before, we had kind of a cooler summer with less hot days and shorter than what we might normally have. So those things combined meant much smaller banana plants this year than what I typically have. They still did okay. And we'll see what it takes, how long we get before it actually freezes and we lose these things. Now, this is the other patch of Musa Basjoos that I have in the backyard. You can see similarly the older, larger stems from last year. None of these fruited, but none of them came back. It was all new plants, new babies. You can see that one there that's bigger is from an older stem, but a smaller, older stem. The big ones, nothing. They didn't grow at all in the spring, and they didn't grow at all towards the end of the year either. This patch is about as big as they were last year in this patch. So not terribly large, but also not crazy small. Needs a little cleanup down in the inside here, but a number of medium-sized plants that did well. The other area where I had Musa Basjoos are in this pot. Now, this pot got no extra protection. It gets some natural protection where it's at, but got no heat, got no extra lights, and still managed to push out some new Musa Basjoos this year. Did not freeze all the way through, even though it's in a pot. We got a couple out here in May that started pushing out. And here you can see the protection that it gets is from the hot tub. That pot is in the back there in between those two Windmill Palms. And that's enough to provide it enough warmth to allow it to survive even when you have cold temperatures in the teens. We had Fahrenheit for lows over the winter. Still managed to survive in that pot being back there. And this is how it looks now. Again, they didn't grow huge, but they did grow back. And you can see the other neighbor's bananas in the back there, similar size to Tim's. But the ones in the pot did better than I thought they would do. I didn't think they were going to come back. And they came back a little bit. And hopefully next year we'll get even bigger. Next, we're taking a look at the Mule Palm. Now, last winter, this palm actually lost its spear, and you can see that by the spring it had grown back, and we had some solid new growth coming out of the center of this plant. Still looked a little ragged on the edges from the damage that it took in the winter, but doing okay otherwise. And if we look at it now, we got a couple of additional new fronds this year over the summer, and you can see some of the real damage from last year there, but overall it's a healthy plant, looking really good, pushing out new growth, and has gone past the danger spot at this point. This thing is fine and will continue to do well. Next, we're looking at where I planted a Musa Sikkimensis last year. By May, nothing had come out. Now, this is a little bit of a funny story, so go with me on this one. I put it here wanting some in the front yard, which is where this is. By May, nothing had come back. I thought it was dead for sure. Kind of poking around, I didn't see anything that resembled any kind of corm still left, and I figured it was not coming back. Now, I had another banana. This is one of 4 Musa Namwahs that survived the winter. To be clear, I had 4, 3 of them died. This is the only one that survived. Let me say it that way. And so I thought, well, I'll stick this one where I tried to grow the Sikkimensis. And so I took this one that was left and planted it in that spot in the front yard. And not long after I planted it, another banana popped out. And at first I thought, oh, it's kicking out a pup already. But as it developed, you can see these are not the same plants. And the one on the left is actually Musa Sikkimensis that came back eventually. Didn't get very big this year, either of them. But I left them alone. And so by the end of this year now, we've got the Musa Sikkimensis on the left. You can see the backs are very different, obviously different plants, but both of them did okay in the spot that they were in. These are getting dug out. I'll keep them inside for the winter, and we'll decide which one of these I will put back here next year, and I'll do something different with the other one. Next, we have a needle palm. This was put in the ground last summer. This is taking a look at it in the spring, made it through winter okay, no real issues, no real damage. Taking a look at it now, it looks okay. Some of the older fronds are showing wear and tear. It did try and push out some seeds. Didn't really do anything. There's not another needle palm that I have here to fertilize it, but it's doing okay where it is. It is starting to push out some other growth down below that you can see. So that'll be fun to watch as these offshoots develop, one on either side there. But doing well, and will continue to do well, I'm sure, where it's at. Next, we're taking a look at the large Pindo that I have potted in the back. This one lost its spear over the winter and has really struggled through the spring. You can see these inner fronds lost their color. And this one I did treat several times with hydrogen peroxide as well as copper fungicide. You can see a giant gaping hole there where the spear should be. Taking a look at this now, it doesn't look any different, unfortunately. No new growth on it. It's still not dead, which I guess is positive, but also no new growth out of this thing whatsoever at this point. I will leave it where it is. It's pushed underneath my covered area, so it's not getting any rain in that spear hole there, but it's still on the fence whether this one is going to make it or not. As long as it's green, there's still a chance. But yeah, no new growth on this one this year. And the other Pindo that I put in the ground came through the winter just fine. No significant damage on this one at all. The tips got a little frosted and a little damaged, but the spear was still good. It looks a little funky. Some of those fronds they don't look well developed, but it's still looks fine. It's green and seems to be happy. Looking at it now, doesn't look a whole lot different. It did push out some growth from the center, just a little bit, but doesn't really show any, like it's hard to tell the difference looking at the pictures. It wasn't crazy growth that made a material difference in its size, but still doing well, growing, happy, and we will get this thing ready for winter. I don't actually do anything to it at this point, but if it does get cold, I'll wrap it with Christmas lights and maybe put a tarp on it to keep some of the rain out. Next, we have a Puerto Rican hat palm. This took significant damage over the winter. I did leave it out for all but the coldest days, and you can see it died back to just a little nubbin of a plant here. Not quite what I expected. I know that there's one or two of these in the ground not far from me, and sizable ones, so they should be able to survive okay. But this one, first real winter in this area, so didn't do okay. Looking at it now, it got some growth back, pushed out some little bit of new growth, and is looking better than it did. Still alive, still growing, so that's good. We'll leave this out again like I did last year. I mean, I'm very much of the opinion I don't need more plants inside to take care of, so if this can't survive outside for at least most of the winter, I'll just let it go. Next, we have a Puerto Rican plantain. This is how it looked at the end of spring. You can see it had one pup. They're starting to kick out, and medium height, not crazy tall, few feet tall, close probably 3 feet of trunk. And looking at it now, it didn't really get much taller, similar to a lot of the other bananas, but it did push out. You can see there's 5 pups now total, and it's still healthy, still growing. This one's also a little bit yellow, probably because of the cold and leaving it out longer than I should have, but it should be fine indoors now, and it'll hopefully survive another winter indoors. Next, we've got the Pygmy date palm. Here's how it looked in the spring. And then taking a look at it now, doesn't look a whole lot different. It is bigger. It continues to grow. This is one of my older palms to me. I think this was the third palm that I bought. Had it for about 6 years, and it's been in the pot the whole time. And it's done well. It's a little bit yellow, I think, also from the cold, leaving it out. It was super green up until about a week ago, and then it started to turn yellow on the edges, but I think it's doing fine, and it's indoors now, and it'll stay indoors until next spring. Another new plant last year. This is in the front yard again, Yucca Rostrada. The CEO made me get this one. It looks kind of cool, but I wouldn't have bought it if she didn't want it. And so that spent its first winter in the ground, did okay. And now looking at it after the summer, this thing actually got giant. It's about doubled in size. It is doing really well. So going into another winter, seemed to do okay last winter, didn't have any issues with it. I would expect the same out of this coming winter. Next we have a Sabal Minor. This one I've left in the pot. I had two of these. One of them I left outside and eventually put that one in the ground. It died in the cold. But this one in the pot, I've pulled it indoors when it's been really cold. It's doing okay. Looks not all that different from what the Cabbage Palm looks like. This is how it looks now. Similar size. It pushed out a new frond. I mean, this is expected to be a slow grower because it needs a lot of heat to grow quickly, which we just don't always get here in the Pacific Northwest, but did put out a new frond and is doing okay. Now taking a look in our box of randomness over here where we plant random things that we get from friends and family. We had this, I don't even know what it was, some kind of yucca looking spiky plant thing that died over the winter. I cut it down until it was solid and still didn't look good, but cut it down, hoping it would grow something back. Ultimately thought it was a goner at this point, but I let it be, and lo and behold, it started pushing out a new plant. And I was taking the video. I started tapping on the old trunk here, and it had just rotted all the way out, and comes right out. But there's a new one growing in its place, so that was great to see that thing is coming back. And it'll be good to have as that continues to grow. The box is looking a little rough at the end of the year here. It needs to be cleaned out. There's a lot of dead stuff in there that has suffered, but we'll take care of that next spring probably. Now here we've got some super dwarf Cavendish bananas. These spent the winter indoors, had no issues. I got 4 of them. And you can see some of them, even by the early spring, had started pushing out pups. And 3 of these I left outside. The other one I kept inside for the summer. Just wanted to see if they grew any different. You can see the ones outside, they didn't do all that well. Neither did my camera work here, but the ones inside, yeah, they didn't do all, or ones outside, they didn't do all that well. They small leaves, yellowish leaves. This is the one from the inside. You can see it looks like a much healthier plant, bigger leaves, greener leaves. Everything about it looks better than the ones that were outside in the sun. Now these got water every day, so I mean, I guess I could have put more water on them, but I would think they were watered enough that they shouldn't see any type of water issues. But yeah, just didn't perform the same as the one that I left inside. So I don't know what that means for me next year. I might leave them all inside. I might swap them out again. This is the 4th one over here. We'll see what we do different, what we do the same. Next, I had these 2 Washingtonia palms that I was able to acquire at the end of last year. One of these was properly labeled. The other one just happened to be in a different plant. It was the only one like that. And of course I bought it because why would you not? So this is the bigger of the 2. At the beginning of summer, you see the smaller one on the left there. And looking at them now, here's the smaller one. It actually grew quite a bit. It's close in size to what the bigger one was at the start of the spring, pushed out 2 new fronds, and is looking super healthy. Got a little guest who's made a home next to it. And then looking at the bigger one, I put this in the pot that had the smaller Pindo that died, and it's done well in this pot. Pushed out a couple of new fronds as well. And is doing well. It's going to stay in this pot over winter, which means it's going to stay outside. If it gets really cold, I will do Christmas lights and we'll wrap this to keep some of the water out of it. Next, looking at the Windmill Palms. I've got these in a few different spots. They grow really well here. This is what they looked like at the start of spring. You see a little bit of damage. I think one from transplanting. The bigger one there was in a pot, and I really had to tear at it to get it out of the pot. It was a concrete pot. And so it took significant root damage when I planted this last summer in the front here. But this is what these looked like at the start of summer. And taking a look at them now, you can see they look a little bit healthier. Some of those highly damaged fronds have now browned all the way out. But all the new growth is nice bright green, healthy looking plants. And I think these are all set up to put on significant growth next year, as they will have been well established now for over a year. Good new spears coming out of these, and they'll continue to grow well here. And this is the little bunch in the back of the front yard. Planted these at the same time as the others. Again, these were also in pots and took some damage getting out of those pots to get them in the ground. And looking at them now, you'll see good growth, good size base on these, and they are looking really good also for putting on some meaningful growth next year. This is the medium-sized windmill palm that I have in my backyard. You can see in May it was flowering. This thing has done well where it's at. It took a little bit of tip damage around the leaves in the cold last year, but got no protection. And this is what it looks like after seeing 15 degrees Fahrenheit for a night, -10°C or so. It gets a little bit of protection from the cedar, so it doesn't get quite the full rain effect. But even if it did, it does okay. And I'll continue to keep cutting back the cedar tree to give this room to grow. If we look at it now, you can see the tips are a little bit dried out from where it took damage. But overall, it's good size and it has a lot of healthy growth on it. That does it for a tour of all of the important stuff in the yard and what it looked like at the beginning of the summer, what it looks like now in the middle of October. If you have any questions about any of the plants you saw or what I do to protect them, keep them alive, feel free to drop them in the comments down below and I'll be sure to get back to you.